Let's talk Tanya for the 13th of Cheshvan of a leap year. In yesterday's Tanya, we concluded the condolence letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote to the Chassidim in the year 1788 upon the passing of the great sadik, the holy Rebbe Menachem Mendel of Haradak. So that was yesterday's Tanya, the Tanya of the day beforehand, and that was the letter. Sometime after the Alter Rebbe wrote this letter, the Alter Rebbe sat down and he wrote a biur, an explanation, an elaboration upon this letter. But that's what we're going to be studying for the next 2-3 days. Now, actually, if you look at the Chassidic discourses of the Alter Rebbe, as they're printed in Torah Oyer, Likutei Torah, and other places, so it's actually common that the Alter Rebbe would say a Chassidic discourse, and afterwards the Alter Rebbe would give a biur, an explanation on that Chassidic discourse, which he gave. Sometimes, in fact, there's even a biur on the biur, an explanation on the explanation. However, here in the yahrtzeit HaKodesh, this is the only time in Tanya that we find that the Alter Rebbe, there's a letter and an explanation on the letter. And our Rebbe points out that the idea of the passing of a sadik is so difficult for a chassid to be able to digest, so difficult for a chassid to be able to work through, that the Alter Rebbe, he wrote the letter, he realized that's not enough, and he had to write a biur, he had to write an explanation on it. In this explanation, so the Alter Rebbe, he begins by once again citing the Zohar, which the Alter Rebbe cited in the original letter. We had it in yesterday's Tanya, that tzadika, the ispater, at tzadik who passes away, is more present in all the worlds than in our world, than he was before he passed away. What does this mean, that he's more present in all the worlds? And specifically, what does it mean that the tzaddik is more present even in our world than he was before he passed away? So in yesterday's Tanya, in the original letter, the Alter Rebbe gave one answer, that the tzaddik's impact continues to exponentially grow even after the tzaddik passes away. In this letter, the Alter Rebbe will give another explanation. And but first, the Alter Rebbe reminds us of what he said earlier, which is that we have to understand that the main thing we have to understand that a tzaddik's life is not physical life, einam chayim besarim, but rather a tzaddik's life, even when the tzaddik is over here in this world, the tzaddik's life is comprised of the spiritual attributes of emunah, ava, and yira, faith, love, and awe of God. Which brings to mind a story which really illustrates this point, that the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, so in the 1920s, he was in Soviet Russia, and he was involved in creating yeshivas and chadarim and all other Jewish religious institutions, and obviously the government was very upset at him, and eventually he was imprisoned, expelled from the country. But at a certain point in time, he was called in for an interrogation. And the way it was he was sitting at the head of a table, and the table was a long table surrounded by interrogators, and every one of the interrogators had sitting in front of them, right in front of them, had a gun, a revolver sitting right in front of them. And they were asking questions of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe was not cooperating, and at one point, one of the interrogators lost his patience, and he picked up his gun, and he sarcastically said to the Rebbe, he said, "You see this toy that I have here in my hand? It makes people talk. In fact, even people who are mute, this toy makes them talk also." To which the Rebbe immediately and very calmly responded. He said, "That toy that you have in your hand, it scares people who have multiple gods and one world. I have two worlds and one God, so that toy that you have doesn't scare me. In fact, it makes no impression on me whatsoever." An incredible story, a story of bravery, a story of courage. But the Rebbe, our Rebbe, he once spoke about the story, and he said there's a certain depth to the story. When the previous Rebbe said, "I have two worlds," he meant much more than to say, "Well, there's another world that's waiting for me, and therefore, if you shoot me, you're going to kill me. Okay, my soul will simply transition to this other world." The Rebbe says what the real message, what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying, the previous Rebbe, what he was saying was that there are two worlds. There's a physical world and there's a spiritual world. And I am already in the spiritual world. I'm already in the next world. My life isn't a physical life. My life isn't about eating and drinking and money and pleasures. And therefore, your bullet can do nothing to me, because the bullet can kill a physical body. I live a spiritual life. I am already in the next world. That is the life of a tzaddik, a spiritual life. Once we understand that the life of a tzaddik is a spiritual life, we will be able to make sense out of the statement of the Zohar, that the tzaddik is more present over here in this world even than before he passed away. And not only that, as we'll find out in tomorrow's Tanya, the tzaddik, it's not only that we still can continue to connect to the tzaddik, but after the tzaddik passes away, actually, our ability to connect to the tzaddik is even greater because the tzaddik is even more present over here in this world. How is that? We'll find that out in tomorrow's Tanya.